First 10 years of my public ministry were in Madagascar. That smells like a cooking fire over which Malagasy cook rice. And so I'm not quite sure where I am right now. It's wonderfully odd. Senator Worth and Mr. Navarro are respected legislators who are with us this day and dear friends from these many faith communities here in New Mexico. I am so pleased to be able to welcome you again to this luncheon on behalf of the Ministry of Lutheran Advocacy Ministry here in New Mexico. I am grateful that you have taken the time to be with us this day, and I want to express, especially for those of you who serve in our government here in New Mexico, our deep and abiding gratitude for what you do. So this morning I spoke with our faith-based advocates who represent this whole spectrum of faith traditions about their calling to be what I call stewards of the divine Zoom paradox. And while those of you who didn't hear that may think that that sounds like something out of our Big Bang Theory episode, I do want to tell you what that means for me, and my apologies to those of you who heard this part already, but trust me, there will be some new pieces here too. So when I was a parish pastor, I used to show a short animated film to our confirmation students, and it was simply called Zoom. In that film, you see a group of children on a school ground lot playing together, and there's a mosquito that lands on the arm of one of the boys. From the vantage point of that mosquito, we start to zoom out until we see the boy in the playground at the school in the neighborhood in the city in the country, until we see the whole hemisphere, the whole world. We zoom out till we see the world as part of the galaxy as part of the universe is part of this unending cosmos that is infinity and beyond. From that vast perspective on all that is, we then zoom back through the layers of reality all the way to that mosquito that landed on the boy's arm, and then we begin to zoom in to see the details of the mosquito perched on the arm, follow as the mosquito begins to take blood from the boy, follow it into the boy's body. We see blood vessels and organs, and the blood itself becomes individual drops within which we see cells and minute structures onto the DNA and the atoms and the protons and particles, so infinitesimally small that we don't yet have names for them, to the very point of internal infinity and beyond. At which point we zoom back until we are at the mosquito, the boy, and the playground. As people of faith, that vision of what we witness when we zoom out and what we witness when we zoom in is nothing less than a revelation of the divine. Our scriptures bear witness to that. Last Sunday in many of our churches we heard a word from the prophet Isaiah, in which God was described in cosmic terms as one who sits above the circle of the earth, whose inhabitants are like grasshoppers, this one who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, spreads them out like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. This is a God who is the creator of the ends of the earth, who does not grow faint or weary, whose understanding is unsearchable. And on that very same Sunday, we read also from the Gospel of Mark, of a God who in the person of Jesus Christ walked amid the pain and heartache of human life, healing those who were sick, casting out demons that plagued their lives, preaching good news to those who lived in a despair that was sometimes of their own making and often not. This is a paradoxical revelation, to be sure, to recognize God's presence and work in the infinite, and at the same time to recognize God's presence and work in the intimate. It's not an either-or. Either God's up there and out there, or God is near and dear to us. No, it's a both and. Now this matters when we talk about the work we do as advocates. We believe that God is at work in the big picture to bring to fullness God's intended reign of justice and mercy and peace and love. As I reminded our folks This is an evolutionary work, not an instantaneous work. At times it feels as though this work will never be realized. 11 years working on the same tax code. It's only when we zoom out and see the big picture of what has indeed changed over time. It's only when we survey the breadth of the landscape to recognize how those moments when it seems that things have moved backwards have actually become foundational for the change for which we long. It's only in those moments that we begin to be filled with hope and gratitude. But if zooming out is all we do, we miss the point of the paradox. This steady and faithful and evolutionary work of God to bring forth justice and peace in this world is accomplished through us. And that's a fact we only see when we zoom in to recognize the people and the places where our hands and voices are called to be present and active in the most intimate of ways. As Christians, we call this zoom-in work of God incarnational. And as our scriptures confess most often, it is seen in the poor and the marginalized and the suffering of this world that God's incarnational presence and work takes root. To be the stewards of the divine Zoom paradox in the realm of advocacy, then, is to recognize that our specific and particular role matters in this expansive work that God is all about in the world, which is all well and good. But what does that have to do with those of you who are engaged not in the work of advocacy per se, but in the work of governing? Well, I'm glad you asked me. You see, I would like to argue that if you are a public servant, you too are a steward of the divine Zoom paradox. As Lutherans, our way of understanding God's work in the world is not limited to people of faith or activities of the church. In fact, Martin Luther was very explicit that government itself was one tool through which the God of the universe was active and at work among us in very specific and particular ways. That may not be something you hear very often, but it's how we understand what is taking place in the roundhouse and in all the work you do, whatever your role may be. There are at least two ways that being stewards of the divine Zoom paradox applies to those of you called to public service in government. The first is pretty simple, but it's easy to overlook. As you tend to your work, keep in mind the benefit of zooming in and out often. It's called perspective. As you attend to the specificity of a bill or a measure or a law, it would be easy to get caught up in the minutia. But if you can stand back far enough to recognize how your work relates to the common good of all the people you serve, remembering that the welfare of any community is ultimately measured by the well-being of those who are most marginalized or who are in the situations of greatest hardship. This gives necessary perspective to all your efforts. And as you keep your eyes on that larger landscape, you may discover new insights that inform and guide your work on the specific measures before you. I recognize that it's not always easy to know when to hold the line, when to compromise, and when to capitulate. But keeping your eye on the bigger picture can provide important perspective. Sometimes it's simply not the right time or condition for change to happen, or for it to happen in the way we think it should. It may be that your task in the moment has to do with planting seeds rather than harvesting the fruit. As you well know, there is value in such effort, even if others can't see it. We want you to know that we in the faith community appreciate your efforts on behalf of the poor and marginalized, even when the time is not right for specific changes that we hope to see. It is in the willingness to zoom out and in, often over the long haul, that we begin to gain the wisdom that is not only a divine gift, but so necessary for faithful public service. There's another significance to understanding yourself as a steward of the divine Zoom paradox if you're a public servant. It's rooted in the fact that the work of governing is hard, and it can often be thankless. Zooming out to see the larger vision of a God who is utterly committed to the well-being of the whole world and its people. This can offer hope and strength to run your race with perseverance. Zooming in to claim what you do each and every day as your vocation, as your God-given calling. This can be a source of inspiration and motivation. One of my spiritual directors once told me, "Jim, do what you're called to do with all your heart, but don't attach yourself to the outcome." That is great insight for anyone who is a steward of the divine Zoom paradox, whether your service is through the church or through the public sector. Serve with passion in the specificity of your context. Trust the ultimate outcome to a God whose vision of what will be and whose commitment to bring it to reality far exceeds anything we can possibly imagine. And so, my fellow stewards of the divine Zoom paradox, receive this day, those of you who serve in our government, our deepest thanks and our commitment to zoom out and zoom in with you as often as needed as we do this work together. Receive our commitment to be intimately engaged with the nitty-gritty real-life issues of people around us, to make our case passionately, even when we might disagree. Receive our commitment to then trust our shared efforts, the efforts of our hands and voices, to the work of the one who calls and claims us all for this divine task. Thank you.